For those of you who've never been here before, lately I share this at the beginning. This is, I just call it Jesus Talk. We used to alternate Sunday hangout where we had a band and everything. But if you've never been to Stonebrook, or if you haven't been in a long time, Stonebrook's history is basically a little mega church. And it was actually the second largest church in Pulaski County for a long time, which is good, it's okay. But one thing I said when we first started is the worst thing that could ever happen is we just become a big church, which we did become a big church. But for various reasons, this is more what I've always wanted to do. And I sort of patterned it a little bit after what I saw in Jesus' ministry, where for the first couple years of his time here on earth, large crowds, big sermons, big events. But then as he came toward the end, as the movement matured, he took more time with smaller groups and just shared deeper things, went into more detail on things that he just could not do with a bigger crowd. And with a bigger crowd, you can do certain things you can't do with a small crowd. With a small group, you can do things that talk about things you cannot talk about in a big crowd. And with the time that I have and the bandwidth I have right now, this is what I can do. And I wanted there to be a place where there's all kinds of places where most churches are geared towards inspiration. You go there and they take a scripture and they preach something to charge you up for the week. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with the fact that it's more of a surface level thing. You can't get into some nitty gritty. And so what this is there's not music, there's not, we'll watch your children, but there's not a big children's ministry. We just ask questions. There's nothing that I've prepared necessarily, but it's just where we go over any questions that you have, we talk about them. Now, we brought up some questions last week, and as I always try to say, I'm not here trying to say, this is the way it is. This is the way you have to believe. It's another thing with so many churches, it's a deposit of this is what you're supposed to be, this is what you're supposed to believe. If you don't believe like we do, you may need to find a different place. You don't have to believe like me, but I'm going to present, when I talk, evidence, information. This will be more information. You won't be inspired when you leave today. You'll have more questions. You'll be confused. You may be mad, depending on what your background is, and that's perfectly okay. But I share a little different perspectives, and you're welcome to ask questions at any time. If you're watching online, you can actually text 415-SB-ROCKS. This is where we get some of our questions. Last week, we had some questions presented. Oh, there's the person that asked the main question, and she's late. Mackenzie asked the question that we talked about last week, and we'll... Huh? Hi, Radha. Are you embarrassed? Okay, so we're just going to jump into what we were talking about last week and go from there. So, and does anybody have any questions about any of that? Okay. And we're actually going to look at this passage, and because, I don't prepare anything, this question was just asked, and so I talked about this last week, but I realized that this is some of the most famous teaching of Jesus, and it happened in a group sort of like this. It wasn't a big sermon, the big crowd. It was just like this. And the question Mackenzie asked last week was... It was long time. She doesn't remember. I don't even care anymore. Basically, people say that Christians say we're living in the end times, that there's going to soon be a return of Jesus, perhaps, called the rapture, and different things like Mark of the Beast. What is that? And, is there going to be an antichrist that's going to rule the world? And is this all wrapping up and going to be finished soon? And so she asked, why do we even think that? And number one, I don't think that. But I'm going to show you why different people think that. And it comes from what is known as the Olivet Discourse. This is just a big theologian word to mean that they were talking on the Mount of Olives. And I'm going to go through these just as slow as I can. And that's what this time is about. I'm not in a hurry. We can stop and dig into things. Unless, if it gets us off on something else, which often it does. Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes I need to say, well, let's talk about that later. Let's focus on this. So, this is where the idea, and how many of you have heard the idea of Jesus is coming back soon, we are living in the end times? Have you heard that at all? Okay. Since I was a kid. And we'll actually talk about something that I heard as a kid that comes from this very passage that I want to show you has now, in 2024, demonstrably proven untrue. So we pick up this scene in Matthew 24, and this is also, if you care to know, this is also recorded in Mark chapter 13 and Luke chapter 21. Those three, we have 4 accounts of Jesus' life, which you probably know: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Theologians call those the synoptic gospel, meaning they see sin, the same, S-Y-N, and optic, view. They view Jesus the same, tell very similar stories. Theologians tell us that Mark was written first and that Luke and Matthew used Mark as a basis for their gospels. And actually, they say there's a mysterious document that they call Q, which nobody has ever seen. It's just assumed. And it makes me laugh at theologians because they have no evidence of it. But I don't know. I just want you to have that information if you want it. But this is the one that most people use. It's from Matthew chapter 24. This is during the last week of Jesus' life. He has come into Jerusalem just a few days before this. As he came into Jerusalem, riding on a donkey, Palm Sunday, they waved the palm branches and they hailed him as their new king. And as I always try to point out, the Jewish people of the first century were expecting a conquering hero. They were not expecting somebody to die on a cross. That is very antithetical to what a Messiah should be. So they expected him to come in to organize the military of Israel and to lead them to vanquish the Romans. Okay? You good? All right. So this is where we are. Jesus has very recently turned over all the tables in the temple, drove everybody out of the temple, and I don't want to get distracted on why he did that. So, as Jesus was leaving the temple grounds, and you guys look there, I can see it right there if you wonder where I'm staring. As Jesus was leaving the temple grounds, his disciples pointed out to him the various temple buildings. As I pointed out last time, Herod was doing a remodel and an addition to the current temple. He'd been working on it for about 40 years. Started 20 BC, something like that. The temple was destroyed in 586 BC, the original temple, when the Jewish people were taken in captivity to Babylon. But they're remodeling it, and the disciples, who rarely get it, the disciples didn't really understand Jesus. But they just want to point out, aren't these buildings pretty? Isn't this amazing, Jesus? Don't you like this? And Jesus, being the party pooper that he is, he said, you see all these buildings? I tell you the truth, they will be completely demolished. Not one stone will be left on top of one another. It's like, well, thanks for the encouragement, Jesus. Now to them, they are shocked. Keep in mind, they expect Jesus, who's their Messiah, to rally the troops to somehow supernaturally, with the help of the Israeli men, to lead them in battle against the Romans and drive them out. That's what they expect. And Jesus says, this temple is going to be demolished. Well, that brings back flashbacks of 586 BC, when the Babylonian army came in and destroyed Jerusalem. So things are suddenly, and to the Jewish people, the temple complex is the center of their government. It would be like if I am running for president. I just don't have time. and I joke, I can't take the pay cut. It's not true. But let's say that I'm running for president, and here's my election speech. Washington, D.C. is going to be demolished. Well, nobody wants me now. You know what I'm saying? So this is the warning. This is how they're feeling. You mean the center of our government and the center of our religion is going to be destroyed? To them, that means God is no longer with them. So he just says that and walks away, across the Kidron Valley and onto the Mount of Olives. And he just sits down there. His disciples came to him privately and said, this is a small group, tell us, when will all this happen? What sign will signal your return and the end of the world? Now, this is where people get the idea that this is some sort of prophecy regarding the distant future and that the world will wrap up at a certain time and that will be the end. It's not necessarily what they are saying. And when they say your return, and this is where it gets really interesting to me, and it can get confusing to people. I say this all the time. Most of what you believe about the Bible, most of what I believe and have believed about the Bible, is not something that you came to that determination through a protracted, exhaustive, objective study of the Bible yourself. You were handed certain things, either through your church experience or just through being in the United States. There are certain things you believe about God and the Bible that you didn't figure that out by reading the Bible. You were handed that assumption, okay? And I've talked about that in kind of detail. I won't spend too much time right now. But when you see what sign will signal your return, your mind may think the rapture. Now, I like to do this even though we're a small group. How many of you have heard the term the rapture? Okay, what is the rapture? Well, actually, Revelation doesn't talk anything about the rapture. That's interesting to me because, and this is where, understand with this group, feel free to ask questions and things, but I may go, oh no, you're completely wrong. Doesn't mean you have to believe me. But it's very interesting to me. It's fascinating because that's what I have believed my entire life. Oh, Revelation describes the Antichrist. It's not in there. Antichrist isn't in Revelation. There is no figure called the Antichrist in the entire Bible. It's just not there. The rapture is not something that's in the book of Revelation. In fact, until the 1820s, the concept of the rapture did not exist in the church at all. At all. I'll give you the origin of the rapture. Have you guys heard me talk about this before? If somebody can explain to me what I'm about to say, I won't go through it.
I heard you sell more Bibles.
Well, it ended up in a Bible, so that's a good part of it. In 1820, there was a guy named Jonathan Nelson Darby. He was, let's call him a revivalist in England, and he went around tent meetings in England, 1820s. And near one of his meetings, there was a young farm girl who had had a fever for several days. And toward the end of this feverish experience, she supposedly has a vision that the return of Jesus, and I hope I don't spend the entire time talking about this, but that's what we do. Because anytime, and I want to bring us back to the fact, there's so much confusion around this, and again, you don't have to believe what I am saying. I just want to present to you some information. The return of Jesus, let me say this. This is something that most people do not want to face. The disciples, the Apostle Paul, all expected Jesus to return in their lifetime. Expected him to return to earth. Not the rapture, we're going to talk about that. This is the rapture right here. But they all expected Jesus to return in their lifetime. It's the reason that the actual passage that people use to support the rapture, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, the Thessalonians had been told by Paul, Jesus is returning. But the trouble is, it wasn't happening. And so people started to die. Uncle Louis died. Aunt Charlotte died. And so they were asking questions like, okay, now, Uncle Louis died, so if Jesus returns, Uncle Louis is going to miss out because he died. And so there were all these questions, Uncle Charlotte and Uncle Charlotte, whatever. But anyway, their question was, Jesus said he's going to return. It's not happening. And that's where Paul begins to talk about those that are dead when Jesus returns will rise first and we'll all be together. Okay? Now, in fact, I don't know. I didn't want to talk about this. Sarah, can you flip over to, I think it's 1 Thessalonians 4. Let's see.
Oh, okay.
Is that right? Can you tell?
I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know I'm doing it really, really well.
But here's something that's also interesting to me that most preachers won't say. The Apostle Paul, and it's just, I don't know how to see it any other way. The Apostle Paul expected Jesus to return in his lifetime, and he was wrong. Paul was wrong. Okay. Wow, it's really small.
That's what she said.
Is it small up there? Let's see. Yeah. It's down around 15 or 16. Oh,
I had a question. They're all up there. So they're expecting him, this is before they knew that he was
before they knew what?
that he was going to die. Right?
Yes,
So they're expecting him to depart and then come back again.
that's true.
So they're, instead of asking, when are you going to return, why are they asking, when are you leaving us?
Because he basically told them, we're going to Jerusalem, right before he went to Jerusalem. And I don't know that they still believed that. It's unclear that the disciples ever got the fact, because, again, in their mind, you're the freaking Messiah. You're going to rally the troops. You're our general. You're our hero knight on a white horse. You can't be killed. But Jesus said, I'm going up to Jerusalem, Mark chapter 10, I think. And they're going to, he referred to himself in third person, the Son of Man. They're going to mock him, scourge him, spit on him, and kill him. And this is where, it's one of the funniest parts in the Bible, where John and James, the brothers, immediately after that, this isn't in the Bible, but they basically said, yeah, we're sorry to hear about that. But when you come into your kingdom, can we sit on the right hand and the left hand? It's like, we're sorry about the killing thing. But Jesus told them, I'm going to be killed. I'm going to be raised on the third day. I don't believe that they thought that was true. And we get evidence of that when Jesus died, 3 days later, there was nobody at the tomb counting down, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, So this is interesting because, see this, I love to talk about this, but I always think it's boring to people. Matthew is writing this after this has happened. You know what I mean? And Jesus had said to them, we get this narrative in John, where Jesus said, I'm going away. You can't come with me right now, but when I have things ready, I will return and receive you to myself. Okay? So I can only assume we don't get it in Matthew. We don't get the details of that. We get the details in John.
So because of the tense in which he's writing it, Jesus is already gone, so they're more focused on when he's coming back.
Yeah, but I think that I believe they said your return, but this is where, and I kind of shared this last time, and I'm afraid to say this. This is why I don't say it very hard. I'll say it harder today. What they meant by return in this case is not what we have been handed that this is what the return is.
It's just
See, you're going to leave more confused than you were.
no one seems concerned that he's leaving. It's like, wait, where are you going? Why can't we come?
Yes,
It's like, okay, see you when you coming back.
basically. A little bit, yes, yes. Now keep that in mind, but let me talk about where the rapture comes from and what they use and why it's not true. If you're expecting the rapture, I'm really sorry. But this ties into what we're talking about. Are we living in the end times? Okay. We don't want you to be informed, brothers and sisters, about those who have died. See, this was their question. Hey, what about the people that have died? So that you may not grieve as others who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so, through Jesus, God will bring with him those who have died. This is where people ask me a lot of time. I know Marty, the voice behind the wall, asked one time, I like it when she laughs. This is so hilarious to me. Marty is one of the most beautiful humans there is, and she's so faithful. And when Stonebrook's going and blowing, that's Marty's job, is to be there and greet people as they come in. And she will not leave their post. So I appreciate her so much. But I love to hear her talk behind the wall. But she asked one time, what happens to people who have died? Do they just, some people will say, and now we're 4 or 5 subjects in, do they just fall asleep and then come back once that Jesus returns? And sort of like having surgery, where you have no memory of the time past, but you just wake up again. They call that soul sleep. But this suggests, and there's other scriptures that suggest, that people who have died, at least spirit and soul, are somewhere. Some days I believe it, some days I don't. But I'm just giving you information to process that he says God will bring those who've died, Uncle Charlotte and Aunt Ernie, or whatever the other guy's name, they are somewhere, and Jesus will bring them with him. For this we declare to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left unto the coming of the Lord, will by no means precede those who have died. For the Lord himself, with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, the sound of God's trumpet, there's interesting meaning from the Old Testament and all that. I just want to move on. Will descend from heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, and who are left, and here it is, will be caught up in the clouds together with them to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. Therefore, encourage one another with these words. The preachers that I listened to should have read this verse, because what they did was scare the crap out of me with these words when I was having it preached. But let's look at this. This is where people say, see, we'll be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. Oh, so much to say. In the original Greek text, which I'm not a Greek scholar at all, but those that are much smarter than me talk about this painting a picture. Keep in mind, he's speaking to Thessalonians who are part of the Roman Empire. What they are used to is Roman generals, Roman armies, Roman kings going out and conquering different parts of other lands away from them. And then they would return from their conquering to the city. Or you may be a city that is in an area where the Roman generals have recently conquered, and you want to welcome this new government. So what would happen is, and this word clouds is very interesting, because we've been taught, when people talk about the rapture, literal clouds. And that's when I was young, I didn't want the rapture to happen until I was married at least. And there's times I would look up and it's a high pressure system and there's no clouds, and I'm like, good, he can't come back today. I guess I had a very small view of the earth. It's got to be cloudy somewhere. Maybe he'll come back over there. Come back in the clouds. Oftentimes, in the Hebrew mind, especially in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, clouds are a depiction of big groups of people. A great Hebrews chapter 13. 13? No, 12. Hebrews chapter 12, after talking about in Hebrews 11 all the different heroes of the Old Testament that have died and the great things that they did, Hebrews 12 starts with King James Bible, seeing that we are encompassed about, we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Well, it's not talking about cumulus or cirrus. I don't know what all the ones are. But the picture, again in the Greek, it paints a picture of the stadium. I don't know why I'm standing up now. The stadium where there are bleachers on both sides. He goes on to say, seeing we're encompassed by so great a cloud of witness, let us each run with patience the race that sets before us. In other words, you've been given a purpose. These people fulfilled their purpose. You can do it. They're watching you, cheering you on from the grandstands. And that's the picture. It's of a Greek racetrack. It sort of bothers me that in those Olympics, the runners would run completely naked. I don't suggest it, but you do whatever you'd like to do. But that we're running this symbolic race, and there are people in the grandstands, yeah, you can do it. And so I always picture them in the grandstand saying, oh, you stink at running. My cloud, to me, is not happy with me. But anyway, they're cheering us on from the grandstands. That's a cloud of witnesses. It's a big group of people. It's the same picture that happens in Revelation 19 when Jesus returns on a white horse in that picture, in that different passage. But to meet the Lord in the air. But the picture is there is a king coming with his army, maybe his captives, maybe the people that have joined his group, and they're coming into town. And you hear, the king is coming. And so everybody in the town runs out. Very similar to what happened when Jesus came into Jerusalem. They hear, Jesus is coming into Jerusalem. Everybody comes out of the town with their palm branches and lays down their garments in front of him. And they it's a procession, it's a parade. They're welcoming the new king. That's what the Jewish people thought was happening. Our king is coming to sit on his throne nationally. The sovereignty of Israel is returning. I have to make this joke, vote for who you want to. He's making Israel great again. That's what they were celebrating. He was returning with clouds of people, okay? That's the picture that this paints in the original Greek. You go out to meet him, and then you return with him to meet the Lord in the air. That word air is indicative of an authority structure, a government. It's the air around this new leader. It's not, we're going to go up to heaven and we're going to escape this world. This is what this young girl in England in the 1820s. Keep in mind, there's been almost 1,800 years of Jesus people up till then, and nobody ever said, you know what's going to happen? Jesus is going to return up there in the air, and then we're all going to fly. It always bothered me. Again, we're talking of nudity again. Do our clothes stay here? Are we flying through the air naked? Will everybody be able to tell, oh, Mackenzie was wearing that this morning. She's either went in the rapture or she's running around naked. I don't know, there's been times where I came home from school, got off the bus, there was spaghetti cooking on the stove, Mom's car was there, the TV was on, and there's nobody. My sisters are gone, and I figured, goodness, if they went and I didn't, how is this possible? Just nobody's there, and terror in my heart. I missed the rapture. This is awful. Okay, I have to not take the mark of the beast. We'll talk about that later. That was the big focus. You in the black.
When Jesus was with the disciples and he was eating with them, Luke 24, go to Emmaus, talk, conversation. Well, he was robed, apparently in clothes. And when he vanished, his clothes probably that with him.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, so I would think if that is going to happen, you're close.
See, these are the vital things to being a Christian that we have to know. Well, see, this is where I was concerned. I'm going to be raptured. If I'm raptured in these clothes, do I have to wear these for eternity? Or I guess it says we get a white robe, and that always bothered me anyway. I don't want to wear a dress through eternity. Why are we doing these? But all of those things, by the way, which we'll find out, are symbolic. Anyway, and people go back and forth between symbolic and literal and really get things confused. But anyway, this person, this is where the rapture came from. This girl began to share this. Jonathan Darby went to see her, heard this vision, began to preach it. Her thing was, because everybody believed up till then that Jesus would eventually return. And that's a whole big subject that I'm glad to get into. I can't give you, and that's not the purpose of this group, is to give you, here's the answer. Believe that or be wrong. No. But there are a lot of things that we're taught that don't have when you understand what the Bible is, and I'm constantly going back to that. But he began to preach that. It probably would have died down, and here's where the Bible thing, where you talked about selling Bibles, it wasn't really to sell Bibles, but there's a guy, I always have such a hard time remembering his first name. Sarah, Google this or something in your spare time. Schofield, the Schofield Reference Bible, which was very big, both Baptist and Pentecostal. They used the Schofield Reference. I can't remember his first name. Charles, I want to say, but that's probably not right. But he picked up this idea, and then later, Finis Jennings Dake wrote his annotated reference Bible. Cyrus Schofield? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Cyrus. What a cool name. But he put this new doctrine that he heard from Jonathan Darby in his Bible, in the notes, and that's how this idea proliferated throughout all of evangelical churches. Okay? Now, take me back to Matthew 24, and this is where I'm going to try to explain something as we go here, and you don't have to believe it. Signal your return and the end of the world. And we did a series a long time ago here, I always refer to it, the end of the world as we know it. That we think end of the world meaning end of time. When the Hebrews talked about the end of the world, they had a little different thing in mind. So let me go through this as quickly as I can, but I won't be able to. Don't let anyone mislead you. Everything that I'm about to read, if you grew up in an evangelical church, you probably have heard these things given as warnings concerning something that was going to happen in the future that would be a sign indicating the end of the world. Many will come in my name claiming I am the Messiah. They will deceive many. We talked about this last week. This happened in the first century. I'll give you my premise here so it won't keep you waiting. I believe that everything Jesus is about to talk about is answering the question, not one stone will be left on top of another. This is an event that actually happened in history in 70 CE. The Roman Empire came in starting at 66 CE or AD, whichever you prefer, and began to squash this Jewish revolt, ending ultimately in the destruction of all of Jerusalem and the temple. Not one stone was actually left upon another. They flattened it. Jesus is answering that question. He's not saying, so what's going to happen 2,000 years from now when people in America think it's really getting bad out there? Is that when you're going to return? No, he's talking about something that already happened. We can learn things from it, but it's not telling us things to watch out for because this is coming ahead. Don't let anyone mislead you. Many disciples, messiahs, you will hear of wars and threats of wars. And this is what, anytime there was a war, when I was young, very young, the Vietnam War was going. And so you'll hear wars and rumors of wars. And anytime there was any attack or anything, they would say, see, it's getting close. Nation will go to war against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in many parts of the world. Every time there was a big earthquake, and they would say things like, earthquakes are more frequent now. And the data really doesn't show that, but I won't talk about that. But all this is only the first of the birth pains, with more to come. Then you will be arrested. They always, when they preach this, they skipped over this really quickly. You'll be arrested, persecuted, and killed. It doesn't make people happy. You'll be hated all over the world because you are my followers. That happened in the first century. Okay? To these people that are sitting with him, I envision it as a circle, but maybe it's not a circle. If he's sitting on a hill, they're probably all downhill. I don't know. Doesn't matter. Many will turn away from me and betray and hate each other. Many false prophets will appear and will deceive many people. Sin will be rampant, and the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. Saved from what? Saved from this destruction of Jerusalem. We'll see that in a minute. And here's where people sometimes get hung up too. And the good news about the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world so that all nations will hear it, and then the end will come. This is an argument I used to make when I was young. I would say, well, Jesus, because they would say Jesus could come at any time. You have to be ready. And I still don't even know what it means to be ready. I think it meant don't sin at all and just sit there and be nice. Maybe he'll come right now. I would say, well, the gospel hasn't been preached in all the nations. To them, it had. Paul himself said, I can't remember who he was writing to. You could probably Google. But one of the churches he started, he said, this gospel has gone forth throughout the entire world. Well, Paul hadn't been to America yet. Paul has no concept of America. The entire world in this first century had the opportunity to hear the good news. That's not an indication that it's still going to come. Oh, there's so many things I could get into here. The day is coming when you will see what Daniel the prophet spoke about, the sacrilegious object that causes desecration standing in the holy place. Reader, pay attention. In the King James Bible, I grew up with a phrase called the abomination of desolation. Isn't this exciting? This is where people are so excited in this stuff. It's in the book of Daniel. Oh, I could talk about this for hours, and you would be so bored to tears. There is a concept, and Jesus himself does it. And boy, it makes people upset when I say things like this. The book of Daniel was written about 160 BC. And it was written during the Seleucid period when the people of Israel were fighting with the Seleucids, and there was an occupation of them by this empire. And they had a leader, Antiochus Epiphanes. You remember Antiochus? He was a great guy. But he came in to the temple and sacrificed a pig. And of course, that was so repulsive and offensive to the Jewish people. And so Daniel basically said, after that happens, this is going to happen. I won't get into all that. But the thing that Daniel says is going to happen didn't happen. Okay? Jesus is using this scripture from Daniel to describe something because his Jewish audience that's sitting around him is familiar with what Daniel says about the abomination of desolation, what the NLT calls desecration, sacrilegious object. This actually came to pass in 70 CE, again with the destruction of the temple, historically, when Titus set up the idols, I think it's Jupiter, and made sacrifices to this foreign god in the temple after the Jewish people had barricaded themselves in the temple. There was a long standoff. They eventually breached the walls. He sacrificed to his gods and then destroyed the temple. He says, when you see this happening, and he knows they will understand abomination of desolation. You mean like Antiochus Epiphanes sacrificing the pig? Yeah, like that. You see, he's not predicting something off in the future. This actually happened. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills. Now, and I can tell you guys are like, am I in seminary? Why are we talking about these things? Well, Missy actually asked a question before you did last week, ahead of time, and we still haven't talked about it. And I can't believe we're only this far. Luke shares this same thing, this Olivet discourse where Jesus is talking about. And he says that Jesus said this: when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you will know that the time of its destruction has arrived. And this is where people try to predict this into the future. You know, they're going to, Russia and Iran, they're going to attack Israel, they're going to surround them, and that's how we'll know the end is coming. And that's where I always said, oh, so Jesus can't come till then? Because I was happy. I didn't want Jesus to come. I have a life to live here. And they say, oh, no, he can come at any moment. It was always so confusing to me. But this actually happened, and this happened. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills. Those in Jerusalem must get out, and those out in the country should not return to the city. Historically, this happened. Many of the Jesus followers, when they began to see this, and I sort of explained this last week, and again, I don't have the details handy because it's not something I studied on to talk about, but the armies began to surround Jerusalem, and the person at the time, and I cannot remember his name, who said, I'm the Messiah, he rallied the Jewish people. We're going to have our last stand in the temple courts. Everybody gather there. And the Jesus people remembered, Jesus said, when we see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, get the heck out of Dodge. And they did. They went up into the Judean hills, and they were not killed, but all those people that followed this false Messiah that said, God is going to save us from this army. When they saw the armies, they saw it as a sign of, oh, this is the last great battle. God's going to show himself strong. But Jesus said, oh, no. When you see that, get out of town. Because this is where it's hard for me to say. And I said this a little bit last time, and I just need to explain it better. When Jesus came into Jerusalem that day with the palm branches and everything, he stopped and he's sort of on a hill and he's looking around all over Jerusalem and he begins to weep. People talk about the shortest verse in the Bible is Jesus wept, but that was at the tomb of Lazarus in John 11. But he begins to weep and he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you've always killed the prophets. How many times I wanted to gather you under my wings and protect you as a hen gathers her chicks, but you wouldn't listen to me. And then he goes on to talk about, you didn't accept the way of peace, is what he talks about. And now, basically, you're going to be destroyed. Because you didn't accept your real king, you wanted a king who's going to use violence and force to accomplish what you believe God had wanted. But I was teaching the way of peace, and you wouldn't follow that. And it's going to end in your destruction. Jesus came, and we talk about this all the time. His whole message was basically, you don't understand God. You think this. You have a Bible. You've been going to temple. You've been going to synagogue. You've been listening to the Pharisees tell you to keep all these laws. It's not who God is. I am the perfect revelation of who God is. And his way was a way of peace and love. And it sounds like he's just a hippie. But no, as you read, he's revealing this is who God is and who God has always been. And the people in the first century did not get it. And they were destroyed because of it. And in some way or another, this is the destruction of the temple is Jesus enacting his final demonstration of this isn't God, this temple system, this sacrificial system, this religious system, it's going to be destroyed. In fact, the Jewish religion cannot be practiced the way that it was practiced in the Old Testament because it required a place to sacrifice. Basically, it is the end of the world as they knew it. Their religious system ended in 70 AD there. Now, I set a clock always for 45 minutes, and I give you a chance at that time. You can stretch a little bit. You can go get coffee. You can, if you need to leave, that's perfectly fine. I'll probably talk about 15 more minutes if you give me time, but you don't have to. But this is where he says, a person, if you're out on the deck, don't go back to pack. If you're out in the field, don't go back to get a coat. I can just see with my wife, no, we have to go home. My puppies are there. I mean, we would have died in the Jerusalem attack. How terrible it would be for women that are pregnant. But hopefully it's not in winter. Oh, I talked about that last time. I don't want to talk about it again. Yeah. See, I warned you. Yeah. This is where I just mentioned this last week a little bit. Just as the gathering of vultures shows there's a carcass nearby, so these signs will indicate that the end is near. Keep that in mind, because we'll talk about it here. Now, this is verses that people used when they talked about the end of the world. Immediately after the anguish of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will give no light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers in heaven will be shaken. They taught this in some sort of literal way, that we're going to go outside and it's going to be dark, though there's going to be signs in heavens. No. Are you disagreeing with the Bible, Mark? No, I'm not. If you've read the Old Testament, the way the Hebrew people described a cataclysmic, destructive event is with these words. The sun will be darkened. The moon will turn to blood in some cases. Stars will fall down from the sky. They don't literally mean that huge burning balls of gas, millions of light years away, are suddenly going to hit the earth and destroy it. It's just an expressive way of saying, this is the end of something. And that's what Jesus is saying. This is the end of the religious system that you guys have had before. There's a new kingdom. Jesus came to bring a kingdom that they did not understand. It wasn't a natural kingdom. It was, he talked so much about, what was a kingdom of peace? A kingdom of, this is the way that we interact with God. This is the way that we interact with each other. It does not involve an intermediary. It does not involve sacrifice. It is it's an actual relationship. But then, at last, the sign that the Son of Man is coming will appear in the heavens. There'll be deep mourning among all the peoples of the earth, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And it feels like I'm just elaborating more on what I talked about last week, but doesn't that sound to you like it means Jesus is going to return someday? But it doesn't if you've spent much time in the Old Testament, and it doesn't if you're a first century Jewish person, and it doesn't if you're the high priest of the Jewish religion that Jesus said the same thing to. He said to Caiaphas, and I talked about this last time, you will see the Son of Man coming with great power in the clouds of heaven. And that always bothered me because, well, if it happens in the future, Caiaphas, the priest, will be dead. But Caiaphas is still alive. And he sees this destruction of his religious system that he paid so dearly to protect. And this is why, and I don't know if I can understand this, and if I don't know if I can understand it, that's for sure. I don't know if I can explain it. And I said this last time. In Daniel has a vision of one that looks like the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. And he enters in, and there's God on the throne, and this Son of Man comes in, and the description is coming on the clouds, coming with the clouds. And he comes in, and he's given authority over everything. And he sits down at the right hand of God, basically making himself equal with God. This vision in Daniel, I think Daniel 9. Not sure. Read the whole book of Daniel. But somewhere around Daniel 9, when the angel is explaining that vision, Jesus is comparing himself and saying, yeah, that's me. I'm going to come into my authority in the kingdom of God, and this temple system of religion is going to be destroyed. In that sense, and this is where, let me look at the camera. In that sense, it's not the only sense, but in the sense that Jesus is talking about here, he's already returned. 70 AD, 70 CE, the destruction of the temple, is Jesus coming on the clouds of heaven as the authority. In fact, when he rose from the dead, he said, all authority has been given unto me, just like in Daniel, the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. When he's standing before Caiaphas, they have witnesses that say, he did this and he said this, and they contradicted each other, and they were paid to witness against him. But Caiaphas finally gets down to where the rubber meets the road, and says, tell us, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus replies, you have said it, and you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. And Caiaphas, and we talked about this last time, the Jewish people are so dramatic. He rips his robe and says, we don't need any other witnesses. We've heard his blasphemy. Well, what do you mean blasphemy? When he said, I'm the Son of Man, and you're going to see me coming on the clouds of heaven, he's referencing Daniel 9, where this person that the Jewish people viewed as a human-like figure that is equal with God. And Jesus is telling him, oh yeah, I'm that guy. And that's where Caiaphas said, we got to crucify him because he's blasphemed. We don't need anything else. When Jesus is saying the whole world will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, he's not saying, you'll see me surfing on a cloud. No, he's describing this event that will happen. And so that's all I have to say about that.
So he didn't really come back at that time, just what he had prophesied happened, and they were like, oh, he was right.
That's right. And this is where, when you've read the Old Testament, when Assyria comes to, and I know you guys hate the history thing probably, but Israel was 12 nations, 12 tribes. The northern 10 tribes were taken captive in 740 something BC. I can't ever remember that one. It's in the 8th century BC. And they were taken captive and dispersed into the Assyrian Empire, which eventually was swallowed into the Babylonian Empire. But the prophets, Jeremiah, maybe also Isaiah, in talking about that said, God came from the north. The clouds were between his legs. He was riding on a cloud. Well, they didn't see God in a cloud. They're saying this is judgment, if you will. And I don't want to talk about whether it's judgment or not at the moment. But they're describing this Assyrian army sweeping in from the north as God riding on a cloud in vengeance and judgment. Well, this is a similar thing. The Roman army from the north, Jesus, the Son of Man, is riding on a cloud. He's not saying, you're going to literally see me on a cloud. We're all going to go up there and have a great time while bad things happen here and Mark of the Beast. It's all going to be great. And then we're going to return after all these people die a horrible death. It's just not what he's talking about. But I want to talk about this. And then we'll leave, or you can ask questions. Or
31 fits into it.
Do what?
How does 31 fit into it? He sent out the angels to loud trumpet call on the God that is elect in the four winds. Where does that come?
This is where I have to talk about that another time.
Okay.
Because that opens a can that takes a couple of hours.
Okay.
And so I was trying to blithely pass over it, and you had to point that out. I'm not going to talk about it. But here's what I want to talk about, because this is what I was taught as a child. And I've asked this question now that I'm way older than a child, and nobody will answer me. Jesus said, now learn a lesson from the fig tree. Understand this, that the fig tree is often used, and they would have understood it as talking about Israel. The fig tree is symbolic of Israel. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, you can know his, talking about the Son of Man, he's referring to himself, his return is very near, right at the door. And here's where I was so scared as a young person. I tell you the truth. This generation will not pass from the scene until all these things take place. Now, if you're raised in a Pentecostal church especially, you were taught that the clock began in 1948 when Israel once again became a nation. And so the prophecy preachers would say, Israel is God's time clock. If you want to know when the end is coming, look at Israel. And so when Israel became a nation again, in 1948, they said, there you go. Jesus said, this generation will not pass. This generation will see it. So it has to be, quote unquote, soon. Of course, I've always been this way. Yes, Mark. How long's a generation? Well, it could be 30 years, it can be 40 years. And this is just what they say. I don't know. They said, but it's never longer than 70 years. So tops 2000, when? I was going to see if he was good at math. I'm going to put you on the spot. 2018. I began to post, and I can't remember what time during the year that Israel became a nation, but in 2018, I made several posts on Facebook saying, now what? Because it passed the time when it was 70 years after Israel. And this is where, and I joke a little bit, where Christians say, no, Jesus is returning soon. I just always say, maybe, but so far, I'm right. And Paul was wrong. And so this is where, when you begin to go back and look at how they would have viewed it, and that's what's important. He's talking about this generation, you guys that are sitting here on the Mount of Olives. You won't pass until all these things take place. And they did indeed all take place. I don't know, I may not have anything about the mark of the beast. Yeah, I don't have mark of the beast in my notes. Revelation 13 probably. Again, this is a good time to leave. If I were you, I would escape as quickly as I could. Can you find Revelation 13 very fast? I don't know.
Yeah, I got it.
Is it talking about the mark of the beast? Some of you think, since my name is Mark, I'm probably the mark of the beast.
13:17.
13:17. Well, let's look at this. I saw a beast rising out of the sea. Here, now let me ask you this question. See, Revelation, I got to talk about this next time. But a beast rising out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. Is it actually a beast? And did it actually come out of the ocean? Did it actually have 7 heads with 10 horns? Or is this symbolic? Okay, just ask that question. And he has crowns on his head. And he was like a leopard. Its feet was like a bear. And his mouth was like a lion's mouth. And the dragon, well, there's a dragon involved. Do you think it was actually a dragon? Now, one of his heads seemed to have received a death blow, but its mortal wound had been healed. In amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. Now, over my tenure as a guy that's hanging around church way too much, this has been, different people over the years. This has been Adolf Hitler, it's been Mussolini, it's been Joseph Stalin, Ronald Reagan, Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris. It's just all kinds of people have tried to locate, and they say this is the Antichrist. Okay? So I'm just probably going to bring it up and not even explain it. We'll just leave. It'll be great. They worshiped the dragon. So there's an actual dragon? And see, this is what I really want to get you to see. Is it a real beast? Are there really 7 heads? In fact, Jesus earlier, and we'll talk about this next time, in Revelation 5, Jesus is depicted as a lamb with 7 heads. And that it looks like the lamb has just been killed. Is Jesus actually a lamb? Does he actually have 7 heads? Or is this symbolic? The beast was given a mouth, uttering things, opened its mouth, blasphemies, allowed to make war, yeah. Ooh, no. Anyone who has an ear, you're taken captive. I saw another beast it rose out of the earth. It had 2 horns, like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. How does a dragon speak? Puff the magic dragon? What is this? I don't know how a dragon speaks. It exercises all the authority of the first beast on its behalf. See, this is like, why would anybody ever be confused with this? Performs great signs. But here's something, and I'll talk about this more next week. There are things that are obviously symbolic in Revelation. That's the type of genre, apocalyptic literature, unique to the first century, using symbolism to make a point sort of in coded languages. The trouble is, people go, well, it wasn't actually a beast, and they didn't actually have 10 heads. It's symbolic. Oh, it's symbolic. And then they have all kinds of things that it's the symbolism. And then they come over and it says, and hell was cast into the lake of fire. Is that really a lake of fire? Oh, yeah. That's real. Why? And if I have time, and you made the mistake of asking about Revelation, I'll show you where, everybody sees this as symbolic, and then the very next verse they go, oh, no, that's real. And then they accuse me of picking and choosing. But Revelation is highly symbolic. But anyway, get breath, causes. Okay, here it is. And also it, the beast, causes all, both rich and poor, free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead. Is that literally the right hand and the forehead? Oh yeah, that's a chip. You don't want to have one of those chips in your hand. But the beast isn't literally a beast. No. Does he have 7 heads? No. Is that literally the right hand? Yes. It's arbitrary, and it's not respecting the genre. So that no one could buy, this calls for wisdom, let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it's the number of a person. Its number is, and there was a cool song in the 90s by DeGarmo and Key, 666. It was banned on MTV. They banned it. Anyway, the number of a person, its number is 666. Okay, here's where I give a real quick example and then you need to leave. John is writing to persecuted Christians who are being persecuted by the Roman government. He is the beast. I'll just give it to you and we'll explain it next time, or you don't have to believe me. The beast is the Roman Empire. It's the oppressive government. The second beast that does the bidding of the first beast is Nero, and actually Caligula later. It was prophesied and believed, by the way, that Nero, after he died, would raise from the dead. That's why John's talking about it appears that his head had been wounded and he was going to return. But Nero, it's not a science, it's a method that ancient people use called gematria. And gematria, since they didn't have, we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and we also have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When we talk about numbers, we don't use letters, vice versa, unless we spell them out. But they did not have a second numerical system. You probably remember this. I don't know if they still teach this in school. Roman numerals. You have I, V, X, L, C, D, and then M. So and another interesting thing, and this is what a little bit solidified this in my mind, and I'm not saying I'm right, but 666, there's 2 or 3 different things that give you a clue. Nero's name in Greek the gematria of the letters of his name. There's a value assigned to the different letters. Like in Roman, I is 1, V is 5, and so on. There's a numerical value. If you take the letters of Nero's name in Greek, it equals 666. There's some other manuscripts that don't have the number as 666. And I don't know if you've ever done this, but have you ever been being about to buy something and the total is like $6.66 and you're like, oh no, I'm buying a pack of gum. Not today, Satan. But it's just superstition. But other manuscripts have its number is 616. Well, in Latin, which these manuscripts that have 616 are written in Latin Nero's name, the gematria, and you understand, and I'm pronouncing it two different ways because people pronounce it two different ways. Gematria, let's call the whole thing off, is 616. This is not talking about some number that's going to be in your head and forehand, and we'll talk about that later. People, does he have actual 7 heads? No. Is it an actual mark? Yes. Really? How do you know? How are you telling the difference? I can show you throughout the Bible, starting with Cain, that God said, I'll put a mark on Cain so that people won't destroy him. It talks about, in Revelation, the 144,000. I won't get into that. We'll get distracted. Okay. Here is one more thing that's just kind of interesting to me. I'm just throwing it out there. 2 different ways of looking at another aspect of this. If you take those Roman numerals, some people say, I don't know, there's disagreement, that there never was an M, that it was simply to express 1,000 because D is 500, that they would put 2 Ds back to back, mirroring each other. Well, of course, they're not writing on a piece of paper. They're in stone and things, and that over the years, this part down here came away, and we think, well, that's an M. This is just me talking about weird things here for a second. Do you know what it equals if you take the M away from Roman numerals and you add up I, V, L, C, and D? Huh? Well, the numerical value of that is 666. It's just interesting. Other people have said, well, there is an M, but they took out the M because of the 1,000-year reign of Jesus. I don't know. But when the Bible talks about this beast, when Revelation, John is not talking about some future distant Antichrist. He's talking about this oppressive Roman Empire that is persecuting Christians. Don't allow it to mark you. That's what he's talking about. Okay?